larger group.
Hey, this is Terms of Engagement. I'm Archon Fung, a faculty member at the Harvard Kennedy School and director of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation.
And I'm Stephen Richer. I'm the former elected Maricopa County recorder, and I am now a fellow at the Ash Center, and I am traveling today. I am in Crested Butte, Colorado, where I'm speaking at the Public Policy Forum tonight. But during the day, I'm trying to get some hikes in, and so you'll have to forgive me for my less than formal sartorial standard. But the good news is that our guest is wearing basically exactly what I wear on a regular basis, with a white shirt and a solid tie. And so if you were looking for that person, you will still have one such person.
Excellent. Well, I think you look great today, Stephen.
Thank you.
So we're coming to you live, and we do record hat. Yeah, the Harvard. Oh, check out a hat I got from a friend here. Harvard colors.
Democracy. All right.
So we'll be talking about that today. We're coming at you live. If you'd like to join the conversation, please on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you're joining from, you can shoot comments at us, reactions, questions, and we'll try to respond as best we can. And we're also recording. And of course, you can download this later on YouTube or any of your podcast platforms.
And as always, Archon and I are speaking on behalf of ourselves and only ourselves, not on behalf of the Ash Center, not on behalf of Harvard Kennedy School, and not on behalf of Harvard University. So obviously a lot going on. Arizona had its primary elections last week. I was pretty wrapped up in that. But also a new book came out, and that book is authored by our guest. And Archon, do you want to introduce the topic on which you and I have some level of disagreement?
Some level of disagreement. And I think it's kind of a hallmark of the show that we do have disagreements, but they're not on the predictable left-right lines necessarily, which is one of the things I love about these conversations. So we're talking about populism, elitism, and democracy today. The most recent wave of populism in the United States and elsewhere came with this promise. Elites had failed, the forever wars, economic crash, most recently prices and affordability and smugness and condescension. And so the answer is throw those smug elites out and get leaders who actually answer to the people. I found something real in that, although I've never been a fan of our current president, but I found something real in that critique. But then look around everywhere at what populism has gotten us. And so today we're talking about the consequences of populism and going to introduce a very big word, which is the title of our guest's book, which is Kakistocracy, which is rule by the worst. And I can barely say it, but it is obviously Greek and a contrast to aristocracy, rule by the best, or democracy, rule by the people. So we'll be talking about whether populism necessarily entails rule by the worst, and then whether there's an answer to when elites rule. Is there any way to keep them in check, or can we count on them usually to be better than the rulers that populists put in place? And who's the guest, Stephen?
Great. I was really nervous about saying this word for the first time, but you really took the pressure off of me, I feel, with 3 attempts on that. And so our guest is Richard Hanania, who wrote recently this book, Kakistocracy.
Kakistocracy.
So he'll have to tell us how to exactly say it. Yeah. But why populism ends in disaster, Richard and I actually overlapped at the University of Chicago Law School. He was a 3L when I was a 1L, so I went back and I searched some emails to see if we had ever emailed. I think we only exchanged messages through the All Law School community forum, but it's really interesting to see what people have done since law school, and this is certainly not a path I would have predicted necessarily for Richard, but Richard has been a man of many wiles since we're seeing the Odyssey, and he has been the man who has traveled many paths since law school. He has been a figure of great controversy, depending on who you ask, or a figure of great insight, also depending on who you ask. He has been adored at times by the alt-right and by the new right and by the populist right, and he has been shunned by those very people at later times. So just a really interesting individual, and I really enjoyed his book. Sort of more specifically, he's a political scientist, writer, and president of the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, a think tank he founded to study how ideology shapes policy and institutions. He holds a PhD in political science from UCLA and a JD from the University of Chicago, as mentioned. He is also the author of The Origins of Woke, and his writings have appeared in outlets ranging from the New York Times to the Atlantic to the Washington Post. In posting about this on social media, I said something like, Richard begins the book by saying the very forces that he had created, he was now almost alarmed that they had been unleashed on the world, especially in the manifestation of the second Trump administration, which I would say is the closest form to sort of a pure populist government that we've had in some time. But welcome, Richard, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and thank you also for wearing, as mentioned, a white shirt and a red tie, which is the standard Mormon missionary garb, which is my standard garb, despite never having served in that role. So I appreciate you filling in. So, Richard, when I was reading this book, and it's published by Broadside Books, it's about 200 pages, but it's actually a little bit longer than you'd think because the font is quite compact on those pages. And so there's a lot of sort of intellectual heft that's baked into it. But when I was reading it, the whole time I was thinking, like, how on earth was this the guy who was engendering these waves of populism just a few years ago? And so I was hoping you could start by telling us a little bit about your personal story and how you got here.
Yeah, so I was, so my last book, The Origins of Woke, is what it sounds like. It's a book on wokeness, which I was very concerned about. It came out in 2023, so I was writing it the years before, and it was a very right-wing book in the sense that it was more academic, like all my books have been since I've come out of academia. But basically, the underlying argument was that wokeness was terrible, and a lot of it came based in civil rights law. And so I said, Republicans need to do something about this. Going back further, I was one of the original people in the alt-right, like that movement that kind of became prominent, we'll say, in the 2016 election with Donald Trump, which was really not well known beforehand. And so I'd always been a person of the right, and I'm still basically a person of the right. I believe in small government and low taxes, and I don't regret anything I wrote in The Origins of Woke. I still have those same views. I think labor unions and environmentalists have done a lot of damage to the world, to American society. So pretty standard conservative stuff. But there's another axis on which we might judge politics and we might judge policy. And so I've come to believe that this populist, non-populist axis is also very important alongside the right-left axis. And what is the populist axis? I mean, if you look at something like RFK coming into the Trump White House, is that Trump becoming left, or is that Trump becoming right? It's really neither. I mean, it was started out on the left and now it's a right-wing thing. But 15 years ago, elites of both parties excluded people like RFK. conspiracy theorists. People don't remember 20 years ago. If you were a conspiracy theorist, if you hinted that 9/11 might be something that was planned by the American government, young people probably don't even remember this, but 20 years ago, nobody would talk to you, basically, and nobody who was serious in politics. So there is this populist axis, which really was always there. Trump was a populist from the beginning, but a populist who ruled by bringing in a lot of the Republican establishment in his first term. As the Trump movement went on, it became more and more populist. It started to center more around Trump's cult of personality. So it really emphasized saying that the 2020 election had not been legitimate, that it had been stolen. That wasn't a tenet of conservatism up until 2020, late 2020, early 2021, when Trump made it so. It became openness to conspiracy theories, openness to anti-vaxxers, either open racism and sexism, or at least a hostility towards denouncing it. You'll see this with J.D. Vance. There will be just an openness to the stuff that was often excluded. And so this conservative movement, or whatever it was, this Trump movement, was turning into something else, taking on more properties of Trump himself, as Trump himself, the man.
Yeah.
And if you look at globally, this is a phenomenon that's repeating in different ways, obviously, across the world. So we're seeing this global rise of populism. I thought there was a larger story here to tell. There's a literature on it that I discuss extensively in the book, and that's the origins of Kakistocracy.
Great. So can I ask you, winding the tape back, did you perceive it at the time as populism as a substrand of MAGA and Trumpism that would be very useful politically, but would never dominate in the way that it has come to dominate and in the way that you critique in the book?
Yeah, exactly. I saw these problems with Trump. I was, even before I wrote this book, before I kind of turned against MAGA, when I was still on the right, I was talking a lot about the vax issue. I was talking a lot about the stolen election issue. What bothered me about these things was, conservatives were wrong about them, but they were wrong not in an ideologically predictable way. If you said 3 years ago they're going to deny the election and they're not going to believe in vaccines, people would have said, well, okay, I don't, maybe like if they had got extreme on some issue that was identifiably with the right, it was a different thing. So I saw that this populism thing was swallowing conservatism. I mean, the vaccine thing, the Operation Warp Speed, was something that conservative wonks believed in because they believed the FDA was too hesitant to approve new drugs and treatments, wasn't doing cost-benefit analysis correctly. Conservatives won that argument. The Trump administration did something that they thought was great. That's the smart people on the right, and then had to disavow it by the time Trump was running in 2024. And so, yes, I knew it was always there. I predicted pretty explicitly, I always knew I could be wrong on this, that there wouldn't be a place for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the second Trump administration. The tariffs, I always thought, would be would be something that was like the first administration. It wouldn't be nearly as extreme. But what happened was the movement kind of, there emerged actually a class of people who were trying to, they were either Trump's sycophants, so whatever Trump says goes. So those people had been positioning themselves and were in excellent shape to be part of the administration and influential in the administration the second time around. And then there was kind of this attempt among intellectuals to reverse engineer an intellectual version of Trumpism. So again, those kind of people wouldn't challenge Trump's instincts or what Trump wanted to do. So yes, it was always a concern. It was always a concern with Trump. I've always was kind of amazed how people on the right, smart people, would just not see the truth about this man and the movement that he led. But I thought the stuff could be contained.
But maybe it was not that they didn't see it. They saw it, but it was a bet that it would never become the dominant strand.
Yeah,
I mean, like it was a little bit your bet, no?
That was my bet. Yes, it was there, but I think I'm rare. I think I'm the only.
Oh,
I think I'm the only person who. I think most of the smart people I know either became MAGAs. They either became, or they were just, they saw that there were things wrong with Trump, or they had some other psychological mechanism to deal with it. They would make these false equivalencies and say, well, the Democrats also deny elections and the Democrats are also corrupt. You see this all the time.
So most of the way in which you're talking about your movement out is a post-2020 phenomenon, and obviously you cite election denialism as a key component to your journey away from the alt-right, away from even MAGA. Can you give me sort of a timeline, like when did you sort of become a figure within that world, and when was the hard end?
I became a figure when I really started writing under my own name publicly in 2020, 2021. My article started getting attention. So Origins of Woke was 2023, had a lot of blurbs from people who are famous as figures in the conservative movement. So yeah, around that time, 2020 to 2023. But I was always, even when I was writing the wokeness book, I was always highly skeptical of a lot of things that were happening on the right. The endorsed, I gave a very hesitant and kind of conflicted endorsement of Trump in 2024. And so that was, it maybe re-solidified my position for a little while. But then when the RFK thing happened, that's something I explicitly said would not happen, that I explicitly bet on and told people that I'd bet on and said this publicly. When the RFK appointment happened, and then when the Liberation Day tariffs came, I was just like, okay, I was wrong. I was wrong on two big things. And the corruption was, which I knew would be there. It was like the pardons, it was on a different level than I thought it would be.
What was it, just that the hierarchy got rearranged, that you thought that populism as invoked by Donald Trump was in service of, maybe, and for a lot of these people, was in service of conservative values, but post 2025, or when the second Trump administration started, that conservatism got supplanted by populism, and populism was driving the car? Is that sort of when you said, like, well, I'm out?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the roots of it were really January 6th, when Trump was trying to convince people in his administration to do things that were unethical or illegal. And Bill Barr stepped down and a lot of other people stepped down, and it looked like Trump was out of the wilderness. And the people who were still pro-Trump were either election deniers or Trump cultists, or people who just were going to stick to Trump no matter what. So you're right. It gradually became this after
but you stuck for more years, right? And is that bet, I mean, a lot of us, maybe everybody on this who's listening, was wondering, at least, is Trump 2 going to be more or less Trump 1, or fundamentally different? I would have thought maybe a coin flip. It's turned out to be fundamentally different. So were you thinking your state, COVID and January 6th have happened, you're kind of sticking with Trump? And is the thought, well, yeah, I'm sticking with him because there's going to be more people like Mike Pence or Bill Barr, whoever it is?
Yeah, exactly. In some, it would be something closer to that. I thought there was a kind of a center of gravity in the conservative world in the Republican Party, and it really had been hollowed out we found out by the time of Trump's second term.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, there's a ton to unpack there, just because the last 10 years have been one of the most interesting political journeys, I would imagine, in America. And those who aren't familiar with it, there was an Atlantic profile of Richard recently that covers some of it. Also, you can just sort of search online. But this is a person who has gone from sort of the concilier to Elon Musk and to Vice President Pence, in terms of like a person that they really put stock in, to now somebody who has written this book that is unflinchingly critical of the whole movement. I mean, I would say there were a few times there when I was like, oh, this is pushing it maybe even a little bit further than I would go. Like, I wouldn't flat call some of these people. I think low IQ, for instance, is something that you really lean into.
I don't think that phrase appears in the book. That's more of a Twitter phrase. I doubt low IQ appears in there.
Not well educated.
Certainly not truth-seeking.
Statistically accurate. Yes, absolutely.
But so, turning to the book, who is this book written for? Is it for your old cohort? Is it for the Trump administration to have sort of an introspective moment? Is it for tech elites like Elon Musk, who are very high achieving, high performing, high intelligence people who just maybe have glommed onto this world? Or is it for elites? Is it a rallying cry for elites? Or is it for the left to sort of understand what this movement is?
Yeah, it's all of the above. The book was written a little late to get in the DSA stuff, but when the Graham Plattner thing came out, and here was a populist guy, and one of my arguments of the book is that populists tend to be morally compromised on a whole host of traits that seem unrelated, and it turns out this guy is messaging women that are not his wife and has these sexual assault allegations and also has a Nazi tattoo and has also posted things online, and it was like one of these things after another. And I thought there was something there that was consistent with the message of the book. So I want everyone to be thinking about these two axes. I mean, this is not a direct political book like you should believe in X or Y. It's more complicated. It's like whatever your beliefs are, you might be a conservative or you might be a liberal or you might be whatever. Think about this access too, and think about kind of what happens when you lean into this access. So liberals, I think there's something to take from it. Definitely conservatives, there's something to take from it. It doesn't have my last book was kind of clearly smart conservatives who might be in a position of power. Okay, you've got to do something. Here are the exact laws you've got to do. Here are the executive orders you got to sign. Here are the court decisions that I'd like to see. This is more it's a political science work. I want it to be practical, but I also want people to take something about it to help them understand the world.
So looking at in the chat, I just want to acknowledge G. Moke says the original populists were radically different from what we're calling populists today. I just want to acknowledge that I agree with that. I don't think prairie populism is anything like any of the varieties that you discuss in your book. I don't know. Anyway, just wanted to acknowledge that in the chat. But like getting into the argument a little bit, you think that the RFK is not accidental to populism, or the kind of unqualified, not truth-seeking people in government. You think it's essential to the phenomenon of populism, that you start with populism, you're going to get people who are wholly unsuited to govern, if I've got you right. And so what is that logical linkage? It's not an accident, but it's like a predictable, almost essential consequence.
Yeah, right. So what if we start by what is populism and we see why we build the steps to see why it, I think, necessarily leads to better or leads to worse people being in positions of power and influence. So what are elites? Elites are basically people who are playing a status game where they're trying to impress other elites. So you two are affiliated with the Harvard Kennedy School. I'm independent, but I write for mainstream publications. I have a large audience too, but I'm basically playing an elite status game. I'm not trying to have millions of followers on no matter the cost or anything like that. It's the same thing with politicians. There are party men. There are people who are mainstream doctors and mainstream academics and so forth. And populism comes along and says there is a direct connection between we gain status from a direct connection to the masses. So Donald Trump becomes president, not because anyone in the Republican Party wanted it or anybody high up in the Republican Party wanted it, but because the voters want it. Why is Joe Rogan popular? Not because other journalists respect his work, but because he has a large audience. RFK doesn't work through the medical institutions. He basically goes directly to the people and he gets a large audience. And so his ideas start being taken seriously. So the selection mechanism is key here. What are people being selected for? What kind of status games are they playing? Now, elites can have good traits or bad traits. If you get into a good university, usually it means you're intelligent, usually means you have a decent work ethic. If you succeed in academia, we all know that there are sometimes bad things that might be selected for, like conformity or just playing a game or Machiavellian traits. So there's that too. And so I think there's a mix of good and bad that go into selecting for elites. And the more well-functioning your society is, the better the selection mechanism. So in America, becoming an elite is selects for better people than it does in, say, North Korea, where it's just impressing the leader or something like that. And so so what happens with populism, conversely, is that basically, what is the selection mechanism here? Is there any reason to think that if you think the medical establishment has failed, if you think journalists have failed, if you think they've made mistakes, if you think politicians have failed, what is the alternative to that? Is it the person with the biggest podcast audience? Is it the biggest reality TV star? Because in practical effects, these are the choices. This is what happens when you toss out the idea that there should be elites, there should be established institutions that people generally defer to more or less. And that's the question. So it's the selection mechanism that I think selects for really bad traits. And I think empirically we see these things across the board. It's like not a coincidence that the biggest racists in society and the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theorists, these are kind of independent things. You could have a racist who's not a conspiracy theorist and somebody who's not an anti-vaxxer who's racist or whatever. Any combination is possible. But these people all love Trump, right? These are people who see Trump as their biggest representative more than any other politician. And there's probably something there. It makes sense when you understand what elites are selecting for and what populist movements are selecting for.
Archon, pushing back on that. I mean, does populism naturally descend into sort of a conspiratorial mindset, into some of the sort of racist tropes, et cetera, et cetera?
I think so, yeah. So what populists tend to do, where they find an opening to challenge elites, is they find things where elites are out of touch. Now, usually populists themselves will talk about this in a good way. Oh, real regular people are, they're hardworking or they're honest, and these elites are out of touch, and we need to get back to the regular people. If you look at like polling data, there might be some of that stuff might be true. But if you look at actually polling data and kind of what regular people believe, views that are underrepresented among elites, it's often explicit racism. I mean, a large portion of the people will respond that they're explicitly racist. It's conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theorists have always been the most underrepresented people in American politics at the highest level. And it's not new. You go back 20 years ago and you poll people on whether vaccines cause autism or whether 9/11, there was a conspiracy behind it. Really high numbers. I mean, there was, you'll find 10, 20, 30%, depending on the poll and the question, that agree with that. Now, in Congress, there wouldn't be 20 or 30% who are anti-vaxxers. We're getting closer to that. Even now, in our populist era, elites are still not as anti-vax and racist as the general population. There'll be, a few like Marjorie Taylor Greene and a couple of these congressmen who actually do represent their communities, I think, more than most politicians do, at least on some dimensions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that this is you have to to understand where populism is coming from. You have to have a theory of elites, like who they are and what they believe and what their attitudes and values are, and then see what where the mass public is, and whatever's underrepresented is likely going to be found in a populist movement.
Why do so many of the leader of today's populist movement within the United States come from that elite background, though? So if you think of somebody like J.D. Vance, he went to perhaps the most elite educational experience that you can have of Yale Law School. He then was on all the talk shows, CNN, a successful book publisher. Same with Josh Hawley, similar background. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. So why do you think that can they claim that they have seen inside the belly of the beast and it is ugly? Is that convincing?
I don't know if populist politicians are on average more educated than non-populist politicians. I mean, J.D. Vance is certainly populist and highly educated, and Josh Hawley, you bring up another one. But if you look at the members of Congress who we consider most MAGA, most populist, they tended not to go to the best schools or have these most elite credentials. So I'm not sure if that's statistically the case. I mean, just smart people who get into good schools are going to likely to succeed in life, right? So if you were going to figure out how to get ahead, Vance is an interesting case because he started out very anti-Trump in 2015, 2016, was talking Trump in very harsh terms. And by 2024, he had transformed so much that Trump, who selects for loyalty before everything else, selected him as his vice president and heir apparent at this point. And I mean, that takes intelligence to pull that off. So it wouldn't surprising to me that somebody like that would have elite credentials. To figure that out is quite the trick.
But is it about who the person is and or how highly educated they are, kind of these individual characteristics, or is it about which group they decide to find status and fit and import in, right? Part of the expert group, as you said, right, is, oh, well, our reference group for me is other professors and maybe students. And for journalists and lawyers, they have professional groups from which they derive status and self-respect. And then, you could be the most highly educated person and be a populist leader, I think, and say, well, I just don't care about that. What I care about is more clicks in your argument, or, a bigger audience like Rogan or whatever it is. And that'll lead you, I think, down quite a different path.
Yeah, it's hard to separate the two, because to an extent, us as how we act and our individual traits are determined by our kind of norms that are around us and what we think is appropriate and who we're trying to gain status with and who we're trying to impress. So it's very hard to disentangle these things. I'm most fascinated. Somebody who's doesn't have an elite background, someone who's frankly not going to be politically correct about it, not that smart. When I see somebody who's not that smart and they have 1 million Twitter followers and they're just spouting conspiracy theories all day, and I sometimes think to myself, could I talk this person out of their position? You should not be a conspiracy theorist, because if this person wasn't a conspiracy theorist, he would be doing something else. He would not be like a famous writer or a professor or something like that. So being a conspiracy theorist for that person is probably the best possible thing they could be doing. And then I'm not that fascinated by that. I'm more fascinated by the people who seem like they should probably know better, the J.D. Vance types, people who went to elite schools or have a background or who are clearly intelligent, and they just do populist slop all day. I mean, honestly, I think I don't think very highly of such people, because they made a choice. I think any of us, I think that it's actually, to me, it's actually surprising how few people kiss up to Trump. I remember when he became president in 2017, the number of academics who were openly pro-Trump, like you could count them on like one hand. And at least during the primaries, that changed over time. And like any professor at Harvard or Stanford could have stood up and said, hey, I like Trump. And he probably would have become, one of the biggest people in the world, because he would have been a big fish at a small pond. I'm fascinated. So few people do that, actually. And that shows you the kind of the importance of these norms and these status games that people play.
But it isn't sort of how you're defining it like absolutely essential to being a politician, because if the metric by which you assess yourself is your peers within the medical community or your peers within the legal community, okay, that's fine, that's nice, but ultimately you need to go out and win thousands or millions of votes in order to become an elected official. So isn't every single leader in government a populist to some extent? I mean, we were talking about sort of some of the conspiratorial nature of some of these movements. But remember, Ronald Reagan, who was not necessarily like the populist that we think of as Trump, like they would consult astrological charts before certain government decisions, because they knew that 20% approximately of the American population put some stock in astrology.
Yeah. I want to build on Stephen's question. So there's a great point in your book. You're talking about confirmation bias, and you say, oh yeah, I expect people on the right to have confirmation bias and people on the left. And then you bring up these cases like COVID or the elections, say, well, that's not confirmation bias. That's something much more extreme, because it's obvious those things are not true. And then you say, well, okay, the difference between a populist and a non-populist, one of the differences, like both in the political world care about partisanship and rallying their side, but the non-populist also cares about truth. And that creates some different orientation and constraint. And then building on Stephen's, I want to add a third thing, which you definitely don't say in your book. Maybe if that's the competition, the populist always wins, because if the political game is getting more votes and the non-populist is trying to get more votes, but constrained by this truth-seeking thing, won't they always lose to someone who's not constrained by the truth-seeking thing?
Yeah, so this is worth thinking about. So populism is this thing that exists, but it clearly varies in its strength and intensity across time. So America 20 years ago was less populist than it is today. So yes, it is something that has an advantage. Look, if you're constrained by truth, if you care that your leaders are corrupt, if you care that your leaders lie all the time, that's occasionally going to cost you, because there's going to be a politician who's on your side who says something untrue or has a scandal. And if you're fair-minded, you might actually say that that person did something wrong. And in that case, the other side will have an advantage. If the other side is just completely tribal, yes, that is a danger, and that's always there. And so, I guess the real question here is, why does this not happen all the time? Why do we have truth norms at all? Why do we have corruption scandals in which both parties will turn on a leader? Why do we have these things where people sometimes feel shame? And I think that's kind of the miracle. And my book is about populism, but it's maybe even more about elites, because populism is kind of much easier to explain. Populism is, I say at one point in the book, it's more unfiltered human nature. And it's what you get when you throw unfiltered human nature into the political arena. Why we have elites, why we have journalism that actually cares about truth rather than everything being the National Enquirer or everything being conspiracy websites. Why we have academia. It's easy to explain explain fraud in academia or results that don't replicate. But why do we have all these people like working hard for not that much money, actually trying to build something and trying to find out what's true? And that's kind of the mystery. So I think that's something that's worth thinking about, that people don't talk about.
Okay, so I want to turn to the government manifestation and push back against the theory a little bit. And Josh Haywood in the chat tees this up nicely, which is that we had Henry Olson, who you probably know, a scholar at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, writer for the Washington Post, on about 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And he presented populism as something of a tonic when maybe elites get out over their skis. And in that sense, you can think of, Trump being a call from the median American saying that some of this stuff has gone too far. And so isn't populism just sort of a nice competing, opposing force to rule by elites, and that together we accomplish some sort of harmony?
If you have a balance, right, to keep the elites in check.
Sure. I think there's something to that. And I have an entire chapter in the book on Latin American populism, which basically says, look, a lot of these countries, they do need populism because they are actually broken. The way Trump talks about America is, I think, overly pessimistic, clearly. But the same critique made to a society like Argentina or El Salvador or something like that would make sense. So you might think populism is a corrective in certain cases, especially these societies where they don't have elites that you can say a lot of good things about in the same way that I think we do in Western societies. And I think COVID was another one. But I think COVID, the infringement on liberty was so extreme and so out of whack with the cost-benefit analysis as far as the lockdowns and the school closures and things like that, that I think that some kind of populism was, I was a populist in 2020. I just wanted to push back on the COVID restrictions. I thought they went way tue far. And so, yes, that aspect of reality is there. We have to kind of keep it in mind. But we can also ask, like, why is this happening everywhere right now? And is populism most of the time? Is it in these cases that we're seeing? Is it most of the time correcting something that's gone wrong, or is it trying to change something that's gone right? I mean, often it's like if you just disliked something liberals were doing, if you just disliked wokeness or something like that, you had candidates on the Republican side who would give you that. DeSantis in 2024 tried to run to Trump's right on this stuff, that I'm the real, I'm the real person who's going back against wokeness. Whatever grievance the MAGAs had, DeSantis tried to say, I have your grievance too, and I'm going to be more competent and I'm going to be more focused on that. but they wanted Donald Trump. Why? Because they like Donald Trump, not just because he pushes back on these things, but because he's got some traits that people like and find entertaining that I don't think are positive traits. So yes, I would agree with this, that this balance sometimes, and it sometimes works out in very funny ways where, like, there's the history of kind of the advancement of liberty. There's always been the people who've been the ones out of power have always kind of adopted the principle of individual liberty. Often, very case, we've seen that in free speech. We've seen this in religion and civil rights in other places. And so, yeah, it's there. I think that is that populism most of the time, is it having that salutary effect? I would say no, but I wouldn't deny that is a real phenomenon in the world and that it actually matters.
So I want to ask you one, this is a tough question in the show prep, and then move on to where we might go, the different futures in front of us, given this moment of populism that we're in. And the tough question is, what if the kind of responsible elite rule that you want, conservative elite rule, is not on the table? And the two choices are kind of the choices we have now, which is a populism that is governing versus a very woke elitism, which, I'm not in favor of the elite part. I'm pretty sympathetic to the woke part, much more than you are. But woke elites, as you find in universities and media organizations and Hollywood, what's the greater evil for you?
It really will depend on, specifics. It's kind of a cop out, but it really will depend. Like, what aspect of wokeness are we talking about? Are we talking about some more affirmative
like mandatory
action?
sensitivity training?
I mean, that could be wokeness. I mean, if it's nationalize, the means of production, that would be a different thing. I could tolerate. I mean, I could tolerate the pronouns. It seems kind of petty in retrospect to talk about that. So it really depends on kind of where the damage is going to be. And so, yeah, it's a question that's kind of hard to answer. If the left goes populist and they adopt these Kakistocracy kind of traits, if that's a correct derivation of that word, and then you have also the left-wing economic policies that I don't like. Well, that's kind of the worst of all worlds. So it really does depend on kind of what the actual dynamics are.
Yeah. Okay, well, baked into that question and into your book is a presumption that this current populist government would end catastrophically. And you wrote this probably in the early months of 2025. I'm guessing you stopped writing around like May or June of 2025. And you predicted pretty dismal end to the second-term Trump administration. Has it followed the path that you predicted, or has it been better?
Yeah, so no, it's been about where I predicted. The economy has done okay, but I think it's in the America compared to the rest of the world, I think has been doing mostly better in the more advanced countries. I think as far as like corruption and institutions, I think it's really, really bad. I don't know if we're ever going to get federal law enforcement that is as neutral as it was pre-Trump, for all its flaws. Now the president just has discovered that he could just basically take payments and then just pardon people and nothing will happen. His side's not going to care. Every other Republican could behave like this. Democrats might still have higher standards, but the temptation is going to be there. I'm kind of the state of American society, I think, is pretty pessimistic. I think it's pretty bad. I mean, the reason it's not as bad is because I think that conservative economic policies are correct. And so the thing that is actually working, there was an Economist article about the Trump tax, and they said the tariffs and they tried to calculate how much the tariffs and the immigration restrictions had harmed the economy. And they said the AI boom is holding the economy up. And I said, well, the AI boom is that wasn't inevitable. we could have had a government that tried to restrict the technology. And so they've done some good things too. But I think overall, like, no, I don't think the administration, I think it's been doing long-term damage to the country. It's about as bad as I suspected. I mean, Trump, his best trade is probably the fact that he pays attention to the market and will pull back on tariffs and things when things go wrong. But yeah, it's not too far of where I thought we would be.
That's interesting. So in just the last few minutes, I kind of want to look toward the future, and you do talk about this in your book. And I think, obviously correct me if I'm getting you wrong. I think you see a few futures. One, which the whole book is arguing against, is a populist future, which just does not end well in your view, right? I think that's fair to say. The positive case that you're arguing was, I thought, pretty interesting. You're arguing for an elite kind of rule that fits within elections, but the elites have to, pandering is too hard of a word, I think, but not be completely honest with the people as such. So you're in favor of Obama equivocating on gay marriage when it wasn't popular, even though I think you're right. Everybody who could see who the person was would say, yeah, he's probably really for gay marriage. He just doesn't want to say it for political reasons. And so you're for that kind of, not quite deception, but not fully forthcoming honesty from politicians in order to preserve elite rule. And then in the chat is a third possibility that's that G Moke has raised. He raises Mamdani. I think you probably won't like that example, but I think the type is somebody who is trying to genuinely gain the support of the people, but is doing so in a relatively truth-seeking, quite forthfront way. And you could imagine, left versions of that. There have been left versions of that, and there have been right versions of that. And that's a kind of more, I guess, democratic relationship between politicians and their constituents than either the populist route or the elite route, in my view. But so let's talk about those three.
Yeah. So the Mamdani route, I mean, it's the successes of the left wing of the Democratic Party have worked very well in very left wing jurisdictions, and that's where they've won elections. So Mamdani doesn't have to deal with kind of the culture war issues that he would if he was a national figure. So I don't know how much of a template that is for something that could work nationally. I think nationally, our national politics are really kind of driven by these things. But no, I think the importance of individual leaders is very, very high. So you could imagine a more moderate Mamdani, somebody who, Clinton type, who triangulated on some of these social issues and was more moderate on economics. Yeah, it could work. I mean, the thing is that charisma is a really, really powerful factor in politics, obviously. And I think people kind of look past that. I think if Trump wasn't there, I think Trump people look at as kind of a symptom of our problems. I think he's largely a cause of our problems. If it wasn't Trump, it would be Ted Cruz or DeSantis or somebody like that leading the Republican Party. They would have their own flaws. They would have their own issues. But it would be a completely different thing. It would not just be as openly corrupt and kind of authoritarian and top down as it is right now. And so, yeah, it's going to one thing, I stress is there's no going back to 1950s where the party decides who the nominee is going to be and everybody watches a couple broadcast stations and gets the same news and every society is united. That world is gone. So we have to think about kind of what kind of world we're going to have if we're going to go full populist or we're going to go something that's actually consistent with the way society is now and the way communications technology is now. So people who are good on camera, people who are charismatic, Mamdani, Obama, Emmanuel Macron is in this category. Those people can move us in a different direction. Charismatic, strongman, I was going to say strongman, but say charismatic leadership centered around an individual is maybe usually populist, but it doesn't have to be. And so we've seen that too.
It almost seems like the way out is somebody who has all the tools of populism and could wield the full force of populism, but chooses not to, which
And
puts
cares
a
about
lot of
truth. Yeah.
yeah, which puts fewer institutional constraints that I would really like. Well,
I think we're
Richard,
going to
I'm
need
very
more. Yeah.
sorry to hear that my ideal form of our representative government that I've expressed to Archon a number of times is not viable anymore in your book, which is that for anyone to run for office, you have to first be approved by the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, and the Chamber of Commerce. And only once you've received approval from all
That's
three can you
that's a
actually.
fascinating idea. No, I like this. I like this. This is you had some diversity in there. Like, no, there might be something there.
But I want to start to wrap on a note, going back a little bit to your personal journey, because when I was dealing with the fallout of the 2020 election and whether or not the election was stolen, it was so hard to change people's opinions based off of facts, based off of information on how the system worked, because it almost becomes sort of a tribal marker or a matter of faith. You're somebody who has sort of declared a mea culpa and an about face on the matter of race, in that you think that some of the stuff that you wrote previously is now detestable to you, and you write in your book a number of very compelling statements about sort of the bigotry that is part of a number of these populistic movements. For people who sort of doubt that anyone can change their minds on something as visceral as politics, political stuff, or racial stuff, what was that journey, and sort of how did that turn?
Yeah, I mean, it was always kind of different from, I mean, I was an academic first and foremost. So I was kind of a nerd who read books and liked to know what was true. And so when I turned my attention to politics, it was always from that perspective. If people doubt that people can change their minds, I mean, just look at conservatives in the last 5-10 years. I mean, you don't have to look at me. Just look at the entire movement. Look at the leftists too. I mean, look at some of the things they were saying about homosexual relationships, or they were saying about Democrats were saying about immigration, or Bill Clinton being in favor of the death penalty pretty adamantly. These are things that people have changed, not only individual politicians, but we've seen movements change and we've seen societies change. And at the individual level, like, sometimes you're just going to convince people. At the mass level, it's often going to be a matter of tribalism. It's often going to be a matter of a kind of a hive mind moving in a certain direction. But yeah, for people who doubt people change their minds, I mean, look around you. You don't have to look at me. I'm maybe an extreme case, but it happens everywhere and always.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps that's a good note for us to sort of close on, which is as dark as some of the options in which we could head are presented in your book, and as much as you sort of say the media environment has changed so much that it now sort of facilitates this populism run amok, the fact that people can have that introspection, that they can change their own perspective, and that they can make, I guess, sort of a similar journey to you and to many others, is maybe something that those of us who are in the business of ideas, or of changing minds, or of changing approaches to civil society, we can take heart in. So hopefully that's a nice sort of final
yes.
thought.
What we're doing here matters. I couldn't agree more.
I think so. And I just want to thank you for changing your mind so publicly. I mean, it enables conversations like this, all sorts of kind of puzzles and questions to dig deeper on, that I think are just super instructive. At least for me, I've learned a lot, and I think a lot of other people have as well. So thank you for that.
Okay,
sure.
There's a lot that we didn't get to today that's in the book. So Richard, I'm going to ask you to say the first word of the book's title.
It's Kakistocracy.
Okay, Kakistocracy, Why Populism Ends in Disaster. You can get it on Amazon. It's published by Broadside Books. It's only been out for a short while, so very topical. Goes back and forth between political philosophy, American events, and then international events too. So I think it is compelling for a broad audience. Thank you, Richard, again for being here today. Thanks to you all for watching live and for populating our comment box with some of the good questions. Hopefully we integrated a few of those into the conversation. And thanks as always to the production team, Ralph, Colette, Courtney, Evelyn. We appreciate all that they do. Archon, final words of wisdom.
Just thanks everyone for joining us. And next time we'll have Tom Hicks, who was a commissioner on the Elections Assistance Commission, who was recently let go by the president. And so we'll learn about the Election Assistance Commission and where the elections field is going at this point. Oh, Richard, one last question. So we always do the hot pepper scale here, and it's a little bit different for your topic, but roughly, where is American government and democracy where 1 is like a mild poblano pepper, everything's fine, don't worry about it, and 5 is the Carolina Reaper 5-alarm fire? So where are we going?
I think it's a, maybe a 3. Look, Trump is bad, and it's quite remarkable that somebody could get away with as much as he's gotten away with. But it's kind of amazing that he's not more powerful, given that he's got a cult of personality, given he's the president, given that he has no morals and no scruples at all, and is going to do whatever he can get away with. I mean, the fact that kind of the courts have been buckled, the fact that he's not locking, he's having trouble. He's focusing all his effort on locking up his opponents and appointing people with the specific goal of locking up, XYZ. Yeah, and he still can't do it. He still can't do it. It's remarkable. You're not going to have a man this terrible with this much of a control over his side of the political spectrum, with this much of a cult of personality ever again. So we might be okay.
So 2 cheers for the institution.
Another 3, which is by far the most popular answer we've gotten, which means that we either invite people who are
fine too. I'll go a little bit. I'll go a little bit less. I
wasn't going to criticize necessarily. I was going to say we invite people who are measured and thoughtful, or we invite cowards. And so your choice. All right. Thank you all. See you next week.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.